Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais um episódio aqui da nossa série Aprendendo Ciência da Construção Comigo. Esse é o nosso episódio aqui, seguindo a sequência da Building Science 101 do canal do Neste, Senior, episódio 9. Faltam só mais 2 para a gente terminar essa playlist, depois tem uma outra. E hoje vamos falar sobre vapor e controle de vapor. Um assunto que eu creio que vai ser bastante interessante para a gente. Principalmente aqui a gente aqui do Brasil, que não fala tanto sobre esse assunto.
Funny because it's somewhat, we talked about water management and then we talked about air tightness being a little more elusive. Vapor management is an illusionary tactic by the building science world to make us scared as hell of something.
Yeah, it's true.
No matter what I do, whatever detail I show, where's your vapor barrier? Where's your vapor barrier? Like, vapor to the building industry is this big bad monster.
Yeah.
Right? That's coming to kill my building.
Yeah.
And I have to, be prepared because that big old monster's coming to get me. But, going back to Joe would always say, moisture is in all the air around us at some level.
Yep.
Some places drier, some places wetter. But the reality is it's all around us. And he would always say, who the hell cares about vapor? Vapor is never a problem. Condensation is an issue.
Right.
But vapor is not a problem.
Yeah.
Go to Louisiana on the 4th of July, New Orleans. Like, you'll sweat to all get out.
Yeah.
But it's not a problem until it condenses on that surface and becomes liquid water. In the vapor state, it's just, a bunch of molecules in there that, as the temperature warms, those molecules move a little bit faster, and because of that energy, it can hold moisture a little better than the lazy cold air.
Yeah, that's
where those molecules are barely moving. But it's, kind of synonymous with our bodies. If I'm laying around on the couch, I'm probably not sweating nearly as much as if I get up off the couch and I go out and play basketball. That energy, it brings out that vapor.
Yeah, so if we've got warm air, we can hold more vapor. And when we talk about relative humidity, that's how we measure vapor in the air, right? So if I had my temperature and humidity sensor on the table here, it would say that the air in this office space where I am is probably 70-ish degrees and 50% relative humidity. That humidity percentage is relative to the temperature. If I'm outside in New Orleans, like Steve's example, and it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity, it feels humid. There's a lot of moisture locked up in that hot air. On the other hand, cold air, the molecules are moving slowly in that cold air. Even though the relative humidity might be higher, there's less absolute moisture in the air that's able to be held in cold temperatures. So if it's 30 degrees outside and 50% relative humidity, the grains of moisture in that air are much, much smaller than the grains of moisture in that air that's 90 degrees and 90% humidity.
Yeah, and just being that big old bad monster just makes it like it's a criminal to the building industry. But it really isn't.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, one of the things that I like to lecture on is the myth of vapor. Because again, everybody thinks of it as a liability to my buildings. Oh, I can't let moisture in there, I can't let moisture in there. But we talked earlier about building science and things having the ability to dry. Well, what do you think the mechanism is for a building to dry? Well, they're the same mechanisms that allow a building to get wet.
Yeah.
Right? So vapor is really, it can be a liability, but it's also an asset. Because when things get wet, I need that vapor movement to dry things out.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So I have to build assemblies with the knowledge of, hey, I don't want it to get wet. So I'm trying to manage that vapor movement across my wall. But should things get wet, just like water management, should things get in, I got to provide a path to get out. Well, the same with vapor management, that should moisture get into my wall system, how do I let it out?
Yeah.
And how do I get rid of it? So it's not that, big old bad monster all the time. And that's where, here we talk about it being an asset versus a liability. And that's one of our concepts for vapor management.
So it's perspective, right?
It's all about perspective, and for whatever reason, which I can't wrap my hands around just yet, the building industry wraps their arms around it being a liability, but they don't. I mean, the people that really understand it, you talk to Joe or you talk to a John Straub or Coda, they're gonna talk about drying potential and all of these issues because they obviously thoroughly understand the concept. But for your average architect, builder, client, person, they get in like vapor's bad. And we need to stop thinking about it being bad because it has the potential to be bad, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, good point.
Let's stop thinking about that. The second concept here is the load upon which vapor hits our building. Now, if you're talking about structural loads, there's two types. There's a point load, where me standing on the middle of a floor joist, I exert a specific amount of weight that is a point load on that beam. But if I lay down across that beam, it's still somewhat of a point load, but I've expanded that load across a larger surface area and created more of a uniformed load. And that's what moisture is, right? Moisture is a uniformed load. It never attacks our buildings on the inside. If we have high humidity in our house, it doesn't focus on, 1 square foot of floor area or one square foot of wall area. It doesn't have the capacity to maintain that level of focus as a point load. It hits all of our surfaces in a nice uniform load. So that means that our assembly, unlike say air leakage, where I'm concentrating on a specific transition point, when it comes in terms of moisture, I have to deal with it as this kind of all-encompassing load that's attacking whatever my vapor barrier or smart retarder system is.
Yeah, two things I want to add in on that is moisture, just like heat, always moves from more to less. So if you have a high humidity area and a low humidity area, let's say there's more moisture in this air, if these two bodies of air are near each other, it's always going to flow from more to less. It wants to equalize in the space. That's why in general, in your house, if all the air is connected, that humidity level will be relatively the same. Now you might have some areas like a shower that has a higher humidity for a period of time because you're adding humidity to that space, but over time that's going to be a uniform load. It's going to uniformly act upon your building. The same is true between inside and outside. If you have materials that are able to move moisture through them, they have a permeance from the outside to the inside. If there's a differential, it's always going to want to move from more to less.
Probably the best example and misnomer in the building industry in terms of vapor management is, and you're going to laugh because the minute I start talking about it, you're going to be, man, that is spot on. We just drywalled the house and we put plaster. Guess what's in that plaster? Buckets of water, barrels of water, right? Like they bring a garden hose in the house, fill the barrel, put the plaster in, mix it up, put it all over the barrel. Well, the funny thing about water is it's somewhat like energy. Like it goes into the plaster, goes onto the wall, but it doesn't go away. That moisture is there. So guess what happens? That moisture comes out. So Joe or Julie builder, what do? They go get a nice salamander heater. Well, what do you think that salamander heater does? It burns a fossil fuel and it's dumping a ton of moisture into the room, into an area that you want to dry out.
It's already humid and moist.
It's already humid. So you're contributing to the problem. You're not providing a solution, because heating up that air, it just gives it the capacity to hold more moisture.
That's right.
So the moisture of the wall and the moisture of that heater now are the moisture content in that room. I always tell builders, it's like if you really want to dry the room, crack that window. Let that 50 degree or 40 degree air in, because it has about a third of the moisture as the air inside the house.
That's right.
And you just made a good point. Moisture always moves from more to less. It's trying to equalize. It's just like temperature, moving from hot to cold, more to less. It is always in constant flux in search of equalization. So opening that window, colder, drier air comes in, warmer, hot air mixes with it, and guess what? You get lukewarm water with a lower moisture content that was in the room. When you open that window.
That's right. I'm maybe out of sequence in asking this, but I'd like for you to talk for a minute about vapor barriers, because that's a term I heard a lot in my younger days as a builder. How would you explain that, and how would you talk about that concept in today's Building Science 101?
Só
para dar uma pausa, agora vai entrar na barreira de vapor, que é o que a gente chama aqui... Aqui a gente fala muito de membrana hidrófuga, mas eu já vi pessoas assimilarem também, chamarem de barreira de vapor. Então, se atente a isso, que agora vamos entender essa questão do conceito relacionado à ciência da construção.
We'll start at the highest level. The minute I introduce the word barrier, I'm introducing, let's just substitute it. In any sentence you use the word barrier, substitute without exception, right? Vapor transfer without exception.
That's a great way to say it.
Water transfer without exception, right? So if you're Jim or Julie builder, or an architect that thinks you could beat Mother Nature without exception, and that never is a word that's very definitive, right? Never doesn't mean maybe so. It doesn't mean 1 out of 1 billion times. It means never.
Without exception.
That's
good.
So if you think you can build a barrier without exception, be my guest. You'll be the first one to do it that I do. And when you do it, please call me. I want to come take pictures and video, and I'll make you famous because we'll make it news. But a lot of people call, where's your vapor barrier? Well, let's back off of using that vapor barrier misnomer, Joe would say. And let's really talk about vapor management.
That's great to say it. Vapor.
We have to manage it because management says basically dealing with vapor with exception, not without exception.
That's a great way to say it. I like it a lot.
So the whole vapor barrier idea, we could sit here, we could talk for hours on whether or not to use the word barrier, but you know what? I'm going to cut it short. Let's discard it. Let's never say it again.
It's good.
Because it doesn't make sense. Now, what does make sense is a vapor retarder, smart vapor retarder, vapor management. Those are all concepts that you can get behind, right? Because without exception suggests that my wall, whether it's from the inside or the outside, is never going to get wet. But if it does, with exception, I need the ability to dry out either to the inside or to the outside, depending on how my wall is designed.
Yep.
Right. So I have to, in my design details, I have to provide the management.
Então, só para pausar aqui, para entender, então, o primeiro conceito que ele falou, barreira de vapor traz a sensação de que vai ter uma transferência sem nenhuma exceção. Então, vamos dizer que a pessoa vai ter total controle sobre o que pode acontecer com a natureza, né? Então, agora ele falou, isso é impossível de acontecer. Então, não tem como isso acontecer, não tem como a gente ter controle total. A gente deveria substituir isso, o nome para excluir barreira, chamar de gerenciamento de vapor.
Structure that should things get wet, we have a path to get out.
I want to throw a grenade in that real quick, just by saying, I've heard Joe Stiebrick say this many times, and I'm in agreement. If we deal with the other control layers that were of a higher level of importance, which is both water and air, vapor will take care of itself. This is the both least important and probably least understood of the control layers. And if we do a good job of water management and a good job of air management, vapor is going to kind of take care of itself. With your exception, which I like to put in there, is let's not make barriers. Let's not make that never case scenario. We want to use materials that have some ability for vapor to transfer through them. And often that's referred to in the building science world as permeance, or sometimes perm rating. So when we look at data sheets, let's say for weather resistive barriers, you'll often see a perm rating on that barrier. And I've gotten asked a lot over the years, what perm rating should I use on my WRB? And I think the answer for that is I'd like to not see a 0, but beyond that, it doesn't necessarily matter as long as you've dealt successfully with both water and air. Would you?
I would.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. Now, that brings us into the third concept, though. Because if I strike out the B word, I'm not going to say it anymore.
Maybe you say it.
But if I strike out that B word and I solely buy into the idea of vapor management, then now I have to buy into the idea of it being a rate question. Right? If things get wet, and they do, the question is, how do they have the potential to dry? How do I let the water out? Again, that is such a great quote, letting the water out, letting the vapor out. How do I let that out? So it's okay if things get wet, as long as they have the ability to dry. And dry has to be more than wetting on the scale, right? I have to have more drying potential in my system than wetting potential.
Yeah, that's great.
Right?
I've seen Joe Stiebrick make a seesaw before, and the seesaw diagram.
This was my bad example of that.
It's the same. It's the same thing. It's the same scale, but the seesaw example on the scale, if the water dripping into the bucket makes it too heavy for the drying potential, then we're going to have problems. But as long as that's a slow drip in there and we've got plenty of drying potential, then we're fine. It's similar to those old buildings we talked about, the building in the field with the kiln in there. No matter how that water got in, as long as we had plenty of drying potential and frankly plenty of building materials that were able to suck up some of that either liquid water or vapor water, then we had no issues. But if we're using more modern materials, more broken down materials, things like drywall instead of plaster, maybe even man-made studs compared to an original OG stud like this fir 2x6, which is behind you right here, those things have more potential, the fir stud does, to soak up moisture and to also soak up some of that humidity as well in the house.
I have a real world rate example that I think is a good example of this. So I investigated a building once that it was, I don't know, like 150, 175-year-old building. From the time that we had gotten the phone call to go and investigate it, they had remodeled it about 3 years earlier, 5 years earlier, something like that. So 150-year-old building, that's lasting a very long time. Now someone gets the bright idea, hey, let's remodel it. They go and they insert insulation, they're putting plastic on the walls, and they're doing all this. And they think they're doing something. But what they're really doing is they're messing with the rate equation.
Yeah.
Right? That they're putting less energy into the wall than was there. That 150-year-old building was able to succeed because they just bought a whole lot of energy and it flowed through the wall. So the rate was very high. There was all drying potential. And even you could have put a garden hose against the outside of the wall and it would probably still be fine. There was that much drying potential. But the minute I put insulation in, I'm slowing that rate of energy that moves across my wall. And if I have less energy, then I have less drying potential because I need that heat to help dry. Remember, warmer air, it can take on a little bit more moisture, right? So that colder air becomes a challenge for me. I want to keep things nice and warm, but insulation and energy efficiency and ultimately the code are suggesting that I don't, right? So I have to build an assembly now that understands that rate question. And thankful to us that there's a lot of manufacturers out there that are now making membranes and interior retarder systems that you can put on a wall that they slow the moisture movement into my wall assembly because they know there's no energy inside that wall to deal with it. It's far better to deal with the load in here than it is to deal with the load in there.
That's right.
So I need to stop that uniform load here with a uniform material, which in this case is a giant sheet membrane. But they add the word smart vapor retarder to that. So what they've done is they've basically built a valve in that retarder system that suggests if moisture does get in here, the valve's open and it has the ability to dry back out to the inside.
Yeah.
So it's a one direction drying potential.
That's pretty cool.
Right? So it's excluding it. I won't say the B word, but it's working to slow the moisture migration into that wall system and minimize it. But should it get in there, it's smart enough to open the floodgates to let the moisture back out. So all they're doing is in that one thin sheet of membrane, they're messing with our drying potential and wetting potential because they're minimizing the wetting potential, but they're maximizing the drying potential should it get wet, all within that paper thin membrane.
That's right. And in my building career,
Então, aqui dois pontos importantes. Primeiro, não tem problema, falando de gerenciamento, né? Não tem problema a gente deixar a parede molhar, desde que foi pensado nesse gerenciamento a capacidade de secagem dessa parede. E aí a capacidade de secagem dela tem que ser maior do que ela vai molhar. Então aí entra o gerenciamento, vai estar gerenciando todo esse sistema. Você planejou todo esse sistema para isso. A parede molhou, beleza, não tem problema, mas ela tem uma forma ali de secar e sair essa água. Porque se não tiver, vai acontecer o que eles mostraram rapidinho ali no vídeo, né? Numa obra ali que a parede toda molhada, o USB ali todo molhado, todo danificada a parede. Então isso não funcionaria bem. E aí outro ponto interessante que ele colocou, que às vezes a gente vai... Essa importância de interligar tudo, a gente não pode pensar só numa coisa. Então, vamos pensar lá na questão do conforto térmico. Acrescentou isolamento. Isolamento a gente está diminuindo a capacidade de troca de energia da parede. Então a gente está diminuindo, a gente diminui a capacidade de secagem da parede. Então, vai colocar o isolamento, tem que pensar numa estratégia correta para fazer essa secagem da parede. Aí, entre eles começou a falar que hoje já existem muitos materiais ali com essa eficiência ali para eles. Por isso que a gente tem que ter muita atenção, por isso que a gente não pode deixar na mão só de um fornecedor. Principalmente aqui no Brasil, que cada fornecedor tem materiais muito específicos, não pensam como um todo, em todos esses fatores lá, gente. Primeiro água, depois ar, vapor e por último térmico. Os fornecedores não pensam no estudo, eles pensam no material dele. Um vai ter o melhor térmico, água e ar, nem vou falar nada. Outro, facilidade ali para construir. E não interliga todos esses pontos que a gente precisa para a casa realmente ser eficiente e durável. Então, é isso que eu aqui, né, mostrando, fazendo esses vídeos e falando mais sobre o assunto, é isso que eu quero tentar trazer aqui para a nossa empresa, de pensar mais realmente a casa como uma ciência, a construção como uma ciência, para conseguir interligar tudo isso, para que a gente realmente faça casas intencionais, bonitas e intencionais.
not quite 30 years. I've been building 27 or so. For many years, we used sheets of plastic for vapor control. And that was, in the end, not a great decision for those houses because it was the B word.
Right.
You can't dry through a Ziploc bag, right? If I pour some water in a Ziploc bag and zip up the top tight, that's not going to dry through the bag. And so we want to avoid things that have zero ability to dry through them. And it's very uncommon these days to see that on a job site, and that's why.
I have no scientific basis for what I'm about to say, but I believe it to be true. When they use poly on the inside of walls, and I actually have pictures of condensation on the backside of poly on walls, because the moisture, once it gets in there, it can't get out.
Yeah.
But the poly, although you were thinking of it as the B word, and that was the sole intention that it got installed, it really worked as an air barrier, not as a vapor.
Interesting. So
Right.
it did a good job for air.
So it did a good job. So if you watch the episode on air management where I did that diffusion versus the 1-inch square hole, if I allow less moisture, remember it's a rate question. So if I put 100 cups of water through a hole, I'm getting a ton of water on the backside. Whereas diffusion is 1 cup. But because I blanket my wall with what I considered the vapor barrier, but it's actually the air barrier, I stop that escalation process of the air leak. So I think that, yeah, the poly, yes, it does work. Moisture can't pass through it. It's damn near impermeable. But the reality is I think it was working more as in a very effective air barrier in saving that wall than the moisture.
Yeah. In general, though, we don't recommend that anymore as a vapor control layer. And in the 201 series that we'll be filming before too long here, we're going to get into some very specific examples and ways that you're going to manage both air and vapor on your jobs.
I'm going to leave you with one last one because this one really hit home. And it even hurt a little bit because this is for all you, say, 30 plus builders that know everything. And this is the way I do it. So I had a discussion not too long ago. And the builder wanted to put poly on the ceiling. And I said, why do you want to do that? His answer was, this is how we do it. This is how we do it here, Steve. It might not be from here, but this is how we do it here. I said, okay, but we talk this through. We have a vented roof. The vented roof takes outside air, brings it in, it captures moisture, and then vents out. So I looked at him and said, we're doing a vented attic. He said, yes. I said, do you believe the vented attic works? Of course it does, Steve. We got soffit vents, we got ridge vents there. I said, okay, do you understand the concept behind a vented roof? He kind of started feeling insulted now. It's like, Steve, I've been building for 30 years.
Of course I understand.
Of course I know what the hell a vented roof is. It's to get rid of the moisture accumulation in the building and vent it out.
Yep.
And I said, if you believe all of that to be true, why the hell are you arguing to put a barrier then? The whole purpose of a vented roof is moisture that gets up here, vents out.
Yep.
And it goes out on that airstream. He would not give up.
Interesting.
He would agree that the whole idea and concept behind a vented roof, but he still felt like he had to put a barrier in. And it's like, that's a hard one to overcome because he's not willing to have a discussion.
Yeah.
He actually hung up on me on call.
Oh my gosh.
And the homeowners actually ended up firing him along the way. But my point is that if you're a builder, even if you're an older builder, and we talked about this earlier, that this is for everybody, the 8th grader and the 30-year-old builder, because it's always good. Even if you think you know everything, let's just check it.
That's right.
And make sure you do know everything.
And let's understand the concepts of why we do things, not just do them without thinking.
Exactly. So that's my stories. That's vapor management. Don't give it a bad rap. It's not the vapor monster you think it is. It has the potential, but like Joe and Matt was just speaking of, if we control it in here and we control things like air leakage, our thermal barrier, and water management, vapor is never a problem.
That's right. This episode of Build Science 101.
Galera, não é fácil não. Não é fácil, mas a ideia é essa. A ideia dessa série aqui é a gente realmente aprender, entender a base, a essência. Eu acho que o mercado de construção civil no geral está no momento até atrasado para a gente, os profissionais se dedicarem disso. Claro, a gente tem empresa, a gente tem a parte comercial, precisa. Isso aqui não é palpável para os clientes, mas assim, a gente tem nossa responsabilidade como técnicos também. Então a gente precisa se dedicar a entender mais utilizar aqui as horas vagas para entender mais sobre o sistema, para não fazer de qualquer forma, senão a gente não vai ter obras duráveis, não vai ter obras que realmente vão durar e a gente vai viver sempre no pós-obra, a gente vai viver sempre nos probleminhas. Os materiais, claro que todos os materiais que os fabricantes desenvolvem funcionam, só que não tem testes para 10 anos, para 50 anos, para 20 anos, para 15 anos. E são esses detalhes que a gente vê aqui, esses detalhes da ciência da construção, que vai fazer mudar o jogo para a gente realmente ter obras que são duráveis, obras que têm qualidade a longo prazo. Construir não está barato, a gente tem que ter essa ciência, tem que aprender realmente para fazer as obras com intenção. É sempre aquele negócio, não é acrescentar valor a mais, não é deixar a obra mais cara, é fazer o que precisa de ser feito, é definir as prioridades para a construção. Quantas casas de alto padrão que a gente vê no Brasil, que às vezes é alto padrão só no final ali, no acabamento, e tudo para trás é feito de qualquer forma. Então, assim, a gente só ajustar a questão de ajuste, questão de planejamento, eu acredito que quanto mais a gente aprender, quanto mais a gente falar sobre isso, mais vai funcionar. Então, ajude a compartilhar, você que é profissional principalmente, compartilhe com outros profissionais, que acho que é bacana a gente criar algo assim desse conhecimento em conjunto. Às vezes vocês estudam de outras formas também, outros assuntos, com certeza deve ter gente que também estuda aí quietinho. Então compartilhe o que você vê, vamos juntos e com certeza a gente vai começar a fazer diferença nesse mercado como um todo. Eu acho que é importante o marketing tudo, mas às vezes eu fico preocupado com a forma que é feito o marketing, principalmente quando às vezes chegam clientes pra gente, a forma que esses clientes chegam, que são devido a algum desses marketings aí, que não funciona. É criar problema para você mesmo como empresa e criar problema para o cliente. Então, vamos ajustar que quanto mais pessoas falarem, quanto mais pessoas se preocuparem com esses detalhes, mais os clientes também vão ficar preparados e vão entender e vão querer fazer assim. Olha os caras lá. O Beth, acho que ele contou a história num dos vídeos, né? Começou assim, de problemas que ele vinha tendo de outras obras, ele resolveu entender sobre a ciência da construção ali, e aí foi dedicar. Olha o tamanho que o cara tá agora. Não é só marketing, ele aplica realmente nas obras, fazendo obra própria, tem uma playlist dele fazendo uma obra lá para incorporação. Ele aplica agora realmente, os clientes chegam até ele, querendo ele por causa disso. Então assim, acho que é um processo, realmente não é fácil, no começo não é fácil, mas acredito que um dia a gente chega lá para ter esses clientes cada vez mais preparados. Então, se você ainda não é inscrito no nosso canal, se inscreva no nosso canal, compartilhe o vídeo, curta o vídeo também, que vai ajudar a gente a chegar a mais pessoas. Então, um abraço e até o próximo vídeo.